Hi, my name is Gerhard Gschwandtner, and welcome to our Masterclass. It is my honor and privilege to introduce two panelists. Matt Slotnick is the CEO of Poggio Labs. Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
That's Matt.
And Ed Soho, he is the worldwide CTO for global accounts at Lenovo. Welcome, Ed.
Thanks, Gerhard. Good to be here.
So I would like the audience to unmute yourself and maybe jump in. We want to start with an interesting question that comes from Ed. And the question is, if AI was a genie, what would you wish for and why? And maybe whoever feels moved by that question, unmute yourself, go on video, and share your idea.
So while you're all thinking about it, it's a fascinating question, mainly because a lot of people are curious about AI, afraid about AI, and concerned all at the same time. But if there was one wish you could do and make to allay any of those, what would it be? And it's a very interesting and personal question for many clients because no one's ever asked them that. Right? And years ago there used to be a genie, and you rub the lamp the right way, and out pops the genie, grants you three wishes. That was years ago. Today's genie can only give you two wishes. Why? Budget constraints. So what you need to do is be very careful what you wish for, because if you wish hastily on AI, you use the second wish to unwish it, which means you're out of wishes. Think about the movie Big with Tom Hanks. He was embarrassed at an amusement park in front of his peers, and he went out to find Zoltar AI, and he asked Zoltar to make him big. Zoltar AI did not understand the context of the meaning big, so he just gave him what he thought. And so all of a sudden, Tom Hanks, 12-year-old kid, turns into be a 6-foot guy, person with a mind, a body, the mind of a boy of 12. And over the course of experiences of his AI wish, he found out that he was missing something, that he was looking for other things that his wish didn't accomplish or exposed. So by the end of the movie, he unwished. He found Zoltar AI again, and he wished to be back to who he was before. Many of our clients and many of your clients, if you're talking to them about AI, how do you help them to uncover some of the things that are really closer to them rather than the technology? And I think selling is one of the greatest arts. It's the second most popular art and career you can ever ask for. I won't tell you what the first one is. So when you start thinking about this, ask sellers, how do we help customers change the conversation?
Like to go on screen. I see you all show their faces. Maybe uh, Tony, you want to share your idea?
Hey, Gerhard, I'll jump in.
Okay.
I'm Greg from Poggio. And selfishly, one of the things that gets in the way of me getting to all the things on my priority list are Slack and email and stuff like that that's popping up. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about Poggio and what Poggio does for with AI, and that would be my other wish, but it already exists. So personally, for me, I would like an AI assistant to thoughtfully respond to and take care of all of the things that come into Slack, particularly the ones that I lose and miss, and do the same for my email so that I can focus on the top priorities of the things that I need to get done.
That's a good wish. You want to improve your productivity
Yeah.
and waste less time. Are there any other wishes, Chris Silva or Chris Surdy? or Luca, any thoughts that you want to share? We want to create an environment where we can learn from each other.
Yeah, it is an interesting question. I think about kind of the direction of AI pretty often, and one of the things that has come up for me over the last few days um, is kind of like bias within AI, and how some topics there is some amount of bias, but then other topics there really isn't. And I always think about how AI can help us communicate better and understand each other better and kind of bring us together more.
That is an interesting perspective. So what triggered that wish?
Uh, I'd say just a general, you know, uh, I don't know, like just a general want from me, like a desire to be more connected. I feel like over the last few years, and anyone feel free to disagree with me, that the things have become more and more divisive, and we've never been more connected, but yet there's like this loneliness epidemic that's happening. So it's all been very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that there is a social trend where towards isolation, where there's a book I recently read about, it's called Bowling Alone, where there are fewer people going bowling together, or fewer people attending church, and fewer people contributing to charity and do charity work. There are few members of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and women's leagues and men's clubs. Um, and so technology has isolated us. And I think it's also part of COVID that there was the great time for isolation. I also see that conferences are shrinking, live events. There are fewer people attending, there are fewer sponsors, fewer people travel. I mean, they're still for leisure, but on business. So I think that what you're raising is a very legitimate concern. We are we suffer from an abundance of information and poverty of attention.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
that's great.
Now I know why no one joins me when I go bowling.
Yeah, and Chris, I do think there maybe a little bit of a subtext there. I think around AI is it's sort of clear that AI is going to be it gives you a lot of leverage, or it creates a lot of leverage, and it's going to be a major force in the world. I think that is clear. I think it's there's ways that it could be good and there's ways that it can be bad. And I think when there's sort of step function change like that, there's always that sort of unknown. I think we all probably want it to be a force for good, and in our personal lives, in the world, in our work lives. But it does get a little scary when you can kind of see things being exponential, and you don't exactly know which direction or directions that exponential growth is going to be in. So I think it's a really interesting
It kind
sort
of
of
begs the question,
setup.
though, as sellers, our job is to sell, right? And to help others and things of that nature. So how do we sell with being conscientious with number one, responsible number two, and make our numbers number three? Maybe not in that order. So, but it's kind of an interesting challenge, right? And it's a conundrum I think we all face. And I've been during the course of my career, I was basically carried a bag for over 45 years, right? Selling all sorts of different technologies, different businesses, and different business models. And I found that by being more of a conscientious seller, I actually had better outcomes. Sometimes it took a little longer, but what I found was that the referral network was actually jumping like nobody's business after I established my brand as a seller. It was a little bit different how I looked at it, because in the early days it was hell or high water. I was going to make the sale and make the number, make club, etc. But then I found out that by being more of a conscientious seller and guiding the customer through, it actually started to bring more value to the customer and even to how I felt about at the end of the day, which I thought was rather interesting.
I think there's another issue that we don't talk enough about because in the past we were raised, at least when I was raised in Austria, I was always told that knowledge is power.
Mm.
And I don't think knowledge is power anymore. It is there's too much knowledge, and what is empowering is the orchestrator of the knowledge.
Yeah, it is, and it's kind of fascinating when you hear that, right? A lot of times we hold on to that knowledge, that power, because I think in the past that's how we kept certain levels and things of that nature. Our clients have so much knowledge now. It's actually too much knowledge. And I think the seller, their job is to sort of help them map that journey out, right? And to expose what I call the four-letter words of a conversation. And I always ask him, what do you know? What do you have? What do you want? And what do you need? What I figure out, and during the course of those four questions, I find out what do they care about? What do they like? What do they fear? And what do they wish for? And it's kind of fascinating. They're just four-letter words. I think in our industry, sometimes we like to use, you know, fancy words and multisyllabic words. We put them in run together sentences and we can't really figure it out. And all it creates is four-letter words, blah, blah, blah. Clients have heard this over and over again. How do we stand up and stand out? How do we find nuggets of, let's say, valuable insights and perspectives? Behind you, Gerhard, is a picture of San Francisco skyline, the Transamerica Tower, the pyramid, and the Bank of America. When you look at the perspective of that picture, they look the same height. They're not. What is the perspective as we look at things from a seller's standpoint to help our clients think a little bit differently about the challenges they face? And I think this is the biggest opportunity for sellers today, is to change the perspectives of clients because they are inundated with way too much information. How do we help them kind of cut through all that?
Right. And I want to jump in because you bring up a really interesting fundamental point. When Erhard once said, point of view is the point from which you view, therefore you don't know where you stand. So think about this for a second. When you go to the buyer and you have a conversation with the buyer, you don't know what their point of view is and how they arrived at that point of view. And if you come in psychologically as the superior outsider, let's say a tech sales rep saying that if you stick with your existing system, your company is going to be obsolete, then you assume psychologically the role of the persecutor.
Yeah.
And what do you get in return from the customer? Rejection.
Yep.
So what you was talking about, Ed, is co-creating a point of view and agreeing on that point of view.
Yeah, and in many of my conversations, I actually start with, I do a ton of research. I mean, I research the bejeebers out of them as best I can from any public knowledge standpoint. Then I kind of start connecting all the different dots of those perspectives and salient points that I kind of discover. And I kind of almost create a picture, but the picture is actually almost a mosaic. A mosaic is, basically pieces that come together to show you some kind of picture. But if you take one piece of the mosaic out, the picture is still there. So what we want to do is kind of build a mosaic ecosystem of the person I'm talking to, the challenges they face, the opportunities that you can basically even, ideate with them in real time. And it's always to what I call fire for effect. I was chatting with the EVP of a major insurance company, CIO, CDO, EIEIO, right? And I thanked him for his business, for headquarters, 8,500 desktops of Lenovo, and it was really great. And then I said, how do you manage 30,000 cats? And he goes, what are you talking about? I said, from what I've done and learned about your company is that you have 30,000 cats. He goes, where do you get that? I said, you have 30,000 independent sales agents, wealth advisors, representing your products to your customers for policies. I said, to me, those independent advisors are cats. They do what they want, they stay who they want, they go where they want. And once in a while, they fill the litter box. I said, he goes, oh my God, they are cats. I said, so how do we help you manage those cats? And that's how we started the conversation, right? So I sort of made light of it in the beginning, and then he go, oh my God, they're hard to manage. I said, yeah, that's what I thought. I said, so how do we start thinking about your cats? How do we give them some structure? How do we give them assurance of zero trust? He goes, wow, that's pretty good. He goes, you know what my biggest problem is? And this is, I was not prepared for. I said, what would that be? He goes, longevity. I go, gee, in many cultures, I think that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? He goes, in my business, Ed, why would a 45-year-old buy life insurance if he or she's going to live to 90, 95 years old? I said, wow, that's fascinating. That is a problem. I said, but I think that you're looking at it in a different way. He goes, what do you mean? I said, I don't think you sell life insurance. He goes, yes, I do. I said, I get it, whole life, term, annuities, etc., right? He goes, yeah. I said, actually, what you sell is life assurance through insurance products. And he goes, ooh. So how do you flip something quickly, right? And how do you become what Alan Alda said? A great actor is a great reactor. As a seller, how do you prepare so well that it looks natural, seamless, and easy? And when I use the Poggio platform over the last 3 months, thank you, Matt, very much, I found that my conversations were so, how would I say this, fluid, and creative at the same time. And to me, the more you're prepared as a seller, I wouldn't say the better the outcome, but better the opportunities to do more discovery. And I think selling is about discovery.
But also, there's a role for intuition. Can you explain the over your right shoulder, there's a Ferrari, and
Yeah.
You were working on a Ferrari engine. Share that story because I think it's really relevant.
Yeah, when I do my presentations, one slide, the title is Small Things Matter. And so I said, I'll give you an example. I did something I haven't done in 30 years. I actually decided to work on my own car. Years ago, I used to work on Fiats and Alphas, always tinkering with them. My wife finally said, get a real car. I said, so I hung up my toolkit and I bought a Nissan Maxima. 90 days in, I ran to my wife. I'm going, oh my God, these cars are amazing. She goes, honey, that's what cars are supposed to be like. So over 30 years, I would drive, Japanese cars, highly reliable cars. But one day I felt something missing. And so I decided to work on my own car. It's a 25-year-old Ferrari. It's a 360 Modena and it has 250,000 miles on it. So I drive the bejeebers out of it. I want to get my money's worth. So I went on YouTube and I said, oh, I'm going to check it. Thank God for YouTube. I called Mario, my mechanic of 45 years, said, Mario, I'm going to work on my car. He goes, you want me there? I said, no, I got it. So I popped open the engine hood, looked inside the engine bay, and I'm going, oh my God. Ferraris make wonderful cars to look at, complex cars to work on. The ideal dimensions for a Ferrari mechanic is 6'5" and 5-foot long arms because you can't reach some of the parts. I finally figured everything out, cursing like a sailor, half in, half out, changed spark plugs, mass airflow sensors, and oxygen sensors, all 4 of them. Took the car out for a high-end run. Within 15 minutes, I got an error message on my diagnostic application on my phone. Misfire cylinder 5. Ugh. Limped the car back, popped open the engine bay, called to customer support. Mario, we were on the phone for 2 hours. I said, I did this. He could, what about this? We checked everything out. And he finally said, pull the plug on cylinder 5. I go, what can go wrong with a plug? 0.06 millimeter, 1/32 of an inch, a small gap. He goes, pull the plug. I pulled the plug, Gerhard, and there it was. No gap. I pinched the gap when I pushed the plug into the cylinder. Here is a 400 horsepower machine, 4 cams, 40 valves, phenomenal piece of work engine, running suboptimally because of the lack of a small gap, which then I share with the audience. Given that, what is the gap in your business that needs attention? What is the gap in your strategy that is misaligned? What is the gap in your team? And then what is the gap in your life that needs attention? All the other cylinders are firing. And I figured out, I learned 3 things. 1, get your hands dirty again. Understand what's going on. 2, get in the trenches because of that. And then 3, I now know why I pay $200 an hour for a Ferrari mechanic. All of these things are really important to remember. How do we help the client think through the small things? Big bangs are few and far between and very expensive, and they don't always work. Small things are small iterations. It's like Colonel John Boyd, U.S. Air Force fighter pilot. He had a methodology called OODA, observe, orient, decide, act. It's called the OODA loop. It is unfailing methodology and strategy for action, reaction, observation, and then fast decision making. It's called these OODA loops. And that actually OODA loop strategy was used in Desert Storm for the left hook. So thinking about small things, it is that makes the big difference in conversations, not the big revelation, small ones. And once they start to see it, they start moving, they start inching, they start elevating, and they start executing. And that's how I think sales is being played out. When I do a lot of my research, I use the Poggio platform to find out and filter all of my elements that I have to play with, the elements and the players I'm talking to, who's zooming those players. All of those things are really key because when you map the ecosystem upstream, downstream, and cross-stream, you now have a very good way of understanding the Class 5 water rapids.
So what you're saying is that the salesperson's role is to engage the customer in a constructive, comprehensive conversation where the objective is to find the gap in that 5th cylinder.
Yeah, it's really important. You drive and you strive for that. But then you and I, and we chatted earlier today, when you walk up to like Peyton Manning, when he walks up under center for the play, that's called up from the coaches up on top, he's going to survey how the defense is aligned with the play called. And you've heard him do this over and over again. He calls it audible. He yells out Omaha. He's going to make a change. What are the seller's changes as he observes who's in the room? How are they twitching? Who's looking at who in the room? How are you testing out certain types of plays that over by the 3rd and 4th quarter, it's going to be the money shot? All of these things are part of research. And if you don't do the research, you can have the best playbook in the world. But if you don't understand the tendencies of who you're talking to, where they came from, are they the new sheriff in town? Did they survive a regime change? What does their PTSD look like? You didn't do your homework. Every seller that I actually try and coach, right? I always make sure you do the homework, right? If you don't do the homework, you're going to run it and use the playbook or the script. And your running back's going to run straight into the middle linebacker. I guarantee you. So I use a lot of metaphors. Sorry about that. But, this is how selling works, right? Selling is about observing, researching, and making that investment in yourself, and then sharing that with the client.
I have a thought
Yeah,
on this and kind of playing off of the the metaphors that you use, Ed. And a lot of pitches that I've been giving recently, we're talking about highly technical AI capabilities and features. So I feel like the pitch is not only, I'm not just selling them, but I'm also educating them and,
Right.
trying to have a good mix of, educational talk points or finding metaphors, which is something that I know you're so good at, while also, integrating those selling points and trying not to make it too technical. I've had you know, problems in the past myself where I go down these technical rabbit holes and I just see the prospect's face just kind of, mull over. And it's like, oh, I need to reel it in. So how
Yep.
can I, where do you see and how do you best, I guess, kind of find that level of educational versus, selling and pitching?
Yeah. So I never sell as actually help people come to the realization that they're buying. And my job is to help them understand what they are buying and why they're buying it. I had a CIO conversation, first time meeting him, and he looked at my card. He goes, "Your card, it doesn't say sales." I said, "Well," I said, "I don't sell." And he goes, "Oh, what do you do?" I said, "I help you buy." And he goes, and he had three wise guys in the room, right? Head of infrastructure, head of apps, and head of strategy. And he goes, "Aren't they the same?" I said, "Oh no, there's a world of difference between buy and sell." And he goes, "What's the difference?" I said, Usually 18, 25%." And he started laughing. He goes, "I get it." I said, "Isn't it better to buy something of value than to be sold something at a price?" I said, "Anybody can do price. They just have to drop trowel." And my team's like, "Why are you talking like that?" Right? And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Look, I've done my research on you. In your annual report in logistics industry, commoditized, low ASP, very competitive, and razor thin margins. You're pulling 40% margin on some of your services." And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Why are customers willing to pay you that?" And he goes, and he just smiled. He goes, "I bring value." And I said, "I do nothing less." And he goes, "Huh." I said, let's be really clear about what we're going to bring to each other in this room, in this table, in this conversation. And I didn't say anything about my technology, my the picture of my kids, my, all of the different servers that I have has nothing to do with the context of the conversation. The context of the conversation is, what is the value that you're looking for? How are you looking at the challenges that you face day in and day out? How do I help you think about three vectors? Now, your today business; new, your adjacencies; and next. How do I give you a perspective of all three so that where you are in your business today, you'll easily be agile enough to iterate into the next phase seamlessly and transparently and in an agile manner? And then how do I help you move into the next phase, right? And when you help clients think through now, new, next, you're invited to the next meeting. You're not there to talk about price. You're there to say, how do I help you with your business? And when you help them frame now, new, and next to deliver the three E's, as I call them, right? Exceed expectations, delivered through stellar experiences to earn the right for lifelong engagement. That's the key. Once you get them thinking that way, I wouldn't say you own them, but they sure as hell will make sure you get to the Christmas party every year. You want to shift left in the conversation, not go to the right where they say, "What's your best price? Can you give me a quote? What is your store? How much I need 16 petabytes of storage." I always say, "Why? What are you going to do with it?" I said, "I got it. That's not the problem. The thing is, I want to be very prescriptive and responsible of what you're going to use with it." So I always ask for context, much like behind you, Sam, is the masters, right? What's the context of that? What drives you to post something like that on your wall? Something powerful enough to make sure that everyone sees it, right? So it's kind of fascinating scenarios. I always look for different clues. And the clues not only come from what's in the room, is who else is in the room? How are they reacting? Right? And so if anyone here plays poker, and I play poker badly, all my tells are on the table. What are the tells? How do you use Poggio as a platform? And Matt, again, one of the things I wanted to make sure is to engage with you more, because I found that your platform helped me prepare for the poker games.
Yeah, and I think, Sam, that there's sort of a piece of the question that you asked that, frankly, I think there's a version of this with every customer that we talk to, which is when you're in a conversation at a high level, there's sort of two directions that it can go. It can get really technical. It can get about price. It can get about speeds and feeds, or it can be about business problems. And I think there's sort of an early inflection point in an engagement with a customer or with a prospect where you have knowingly or unknowingly charted your path. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time with our customers on is, what is that message and who is the right person that you need to get that message to? Who do you need to be in the room with, and how do you need to talk to that person to talk about those problems? In Ed's example is like, what is the business challenge that you're trying to solve with this, petabytes of storage, rather than, hey, how do I get those petabytes of storage? And the people that can answer those questions within an organization are often different. There's a flavor of this in I think, quite honestly, every single customer that we have, which is we have a sort of commodity speeds and feeds path, and we have a business challenge, business outcome path. And there's a sort of saying that that I think you've probably heard before, but you kind of get pushed to who you sound like. And so if you don't do a lot of preparation ahead of time, if you don't come with a point of view, if you don't ask the questions to get to the very simple four letter words, as Ed sort of talks about, is you're going to have the conversation that the prospect is going to steer you towards. And if that's a kind of mid-level person that wants to get in really deep into the technology, you're going to probably hit a dead end. You may get to the end of that sales cycle and you may close that deal, but it's going to take a lot longer. It's probably going to be a smaller dollar value. It's just going to be a worse customer generally. Whereas if you kind of early on in that sales cycle, if you can inflect towards the real challenge that through an immense amount of preparation you can uncover through having a really, really well built out point of view, you can call those audibles, as Ed's sort of alluding to, and get to that right place to have that right conversation. And for us at Poggio, that's sort of what we believe is, if you're not in the room having the right conversation, the rest of your sales cycle, it's going to have friction in a lot of different ways. If you get to that right conversation about what we kind of we sort of like tongue in cheek to refer to as the problem. It's what is the problem in the organization? Who are the people tasked with solving that problem? How do you get in front of them, solve their problems? And it's easier said than done, but it all comes back to having a sort of unique point of view that allows you to steer that conversation towards the things that your platform or your solutions are actually good at. And that's a piece of this, is as you start to think about almost the responsibility of it's great to go sell, but you want to sell to people whose problems you can actually solve, right? And it's being really honest about that and figuring out the ways that you can identify those problems. And then if you've got a great product or solution, it's being able to position that in a really sort of candid and truthful way around, here are the problems we solve, and the flip side of this, here are the problems we don't. And it's totally fine to uncover problems that you don't solve. It's better to get to that up front rather than at the end of the sales cycle, when you discover, hey, that person whose burning problem I was solving is actually the 10th most important person in the org chart and is nowhere near budget. And so that sort of navigation requires immense amounts of preparation. Ed, I think there's something you wanted to add.
It's fascinating. When I was preparing for a meeting in Brazil, I used your platform, Matt, to kind of get a heads up on some topics, some projects, some elements that are critical to them. And it was interesting. The guy goes, "Well, I'm looking at this." I said, "How's that tied to?" And I named one of the programs, right? And he goes, "Oh, you know about that?" I said, "Well, I read about it." I said, "I'm really curious. What is the objective of that? Who's really driving that? And why are you coming to that conclusion?" And all of a sudden they go like, "Oh, you understand me." And it's kind of, it's a very, when you watch their body language. I was chatting with a full bird colonel in Pearl Harbor, just took over the command, the U.S. Army Pacific Command. And he brought in his civilian counterpart, Pitbull. And the civilian goes, "So what's in it for the colonel?" Just like that, right? It's a browbeating session, right? You're a sales guy, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. And I looked straight at the colonel and I said, how about a star? He goes, son of a bitch, you know what I'm looking for. I said, yes, sir, I do. And he goes, I like that. I said, at the change of command 2 years from today, Colonel, what do you want to stand for? You tell me and I'll get you there. And he looked straight at the civilian. It was, give this guy whatever he wants, right? Research that person, understand what motivates them, right? He's the new sheriff in town. He wants to stand for something. When I did a briefing to a 3-star Pacific Air Force, Pearl Harbor, has his whole staff there, 20 people. And I'm beginning my presentation, and he puts his hand and goes, before you get started, son, what do you know about PACAF? I said, sir, Pacific Air Force. I went through the whole mission. He goes, not bad. I said, you're part of SINCPAC. He goes, what do you know about SINCPAC? I said, Commander-in-Chief Pacific, JICPAC, USAPAC, SINCPAC fleet, and went through all the organizations. And he goes, not bad. So what's the most important organization in SINCPAC? He wanted me to say PACAF. I thought for a few seconds. I said, well, sir, that would be knick-knack, paddywhack. He slammed his palm on the table and he goes, son of a bitch, you weren't going to kiss my ass, were you? I said, no, sir. He goes, I like that. So how do you establish rapport with someone that, I mean, it's a 3-star, for crying out loud. How do you become like that? And a lot of it is basically, as when I'm selling now, it's really authenticity, right? It's a bit of humility, and I'm going to get you no matter what anyway, right? I'll find a way, but I have to earn my way in. And to earn your way in, you have to talk about the 3 E's. Exceed expectations, experience, and engagement. You have to do 3 A's, assess, adapt, and be aware. In the age of the 3 R's of the 21st century, the recovery, the renaissance, and the roaring 20s. And then the 3 N's, now, new, and next. Earn your way with the conversation. Earn the respect. Do the work, right? So there are no small parts, like Meg Ryan when she was auditioning for Top Gun. The casting director goes, there are no small parts, only small actors. Know your part. Spotlight hits. Get ready for that close-up. It's a lot of fun. And I think I miss selling a lot, although I think I'm selling all the time anyway. It's a calling, right? And when you're prepared, like I've done with Matt on Poggio, I know my lines, but now I have to improv.
Matt, can you?
Hey, Mike, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question for Matt. Can you help us understand the elements that go into a point of view? What are the? It's not just a perspective. It's much deeper than that. It's also a proof of value. It is a package that's filled with insights. But explain what comes out of Poggio when you go through that analysis.
Yeah, great question. So I think the thing about a point of view is, for every organization that we work with, the sorts of points of view that they're trying to build are going to be different because they all solve a different set of problems in a different way. They talk about their value differently. The sort of things that they're looking for within an organization are going to be different. There's some very obvious things. If you're a security company, you're going to want to know about data breaches and security incidents and ransomware. If you're a data platform company, you're going to want to know about AI projects and data projects and where they trying to transform their applications. Those are some kind of sort of basics, but it's sort of like, what is that story that you want to wrap around that? And it's not just, hey, I see you're taking apps from on premises to the cloud, and you probably need a agile cloud app management platform, right? Like everybody can say that. What it really is why are you doing that? Is it an agility question? Are there business problems that you can't solve with your expensive data on premises that you need to move into the cloud because you have to share it with a bunch of different partners? It's sort of, what are those business objectives for the folks at the organization that are tasked with making those big decisions? And so what are the things that go into showing up to that conversation with a holistic perspective for how you can solve that customer's problems? And the answer is not usually just, as Ed has given a bunch of examples, it's usually not just coming through the front door with an essay about hey, I learned everything there is to know about you, and here's what we can do. It's asking those questions to get at the to kind of peel back the layers. And you kind of think about, some of the four-letter words that Ed sort of talked about. I think, fear is always a really interesting one, because
Yeah.
every business exec has worries. If you ask them what their worries are, they're probably not going to tell you.
Yeah.
If you peel those things back to kind of identify and use your intuition and your hopefully high EQ to, hey, like, it sounds like there's a little bit of a trouble spot there, as you're five
Yeah.
questions deep around, we had this data breach and this happened and we weren't set up for this. And, you kind of uncover those layers to really understand what are those kind of fulcrum points for an organization. They're going to allow them to do something. Because frankly, I mean, I think we've all probably experienced this, either working in large organizations or selling to large organizations. It is really hard to get a large organization to do literally anything. In a
Yeah.
lot of ways, they're kind of built to not do that much. It's just at a certain point, you have committees whose job is to add friction. That's just the nature. And it doesn't matter if it's, I worked at Google Cloud for 4 years. We had plenty of teams that were friction creators. Google's got a really, really good business. They don't want to mess that up, right? And so going and identifying those things, and very importantly, the people who can make those changes and sort of be those catalysts for change, is the sort of thing that you need to do. And the way you kind of do that is to really build a holistic picture of what's going on at this company, what's going on in their organization, who are the power players, how do I get to those people to deliver that message, to ask the questions, to get to the real pain in the real world, or in the real words. And I think a kind of an example of this for us that I'll give you is, when we sell to revenue organizations, right? We work with sales teams, ABM teams, post sales, kind of account management, the full spectrum. Because for us, it's around, if you're an enterprise and you're trying to deliver value to a customer, you should have one really well built point of view for how you're going to deliver that value. And it should be comprehensive, whether it's salespeople, SDRs, BDRs, account managers, marketers, everybody should be talking in that same language. And for us, when we go and we talk to these revenue teams and you kind of ask them, like, where are the issues in your business, as it's called, the gaps. And you can look at how this point of view gets applied across the sales cycle, from pre-sales to kind of post-sales and upsales. And when you talk to every organization, they have a different version of where those problems show up, which almost mathematically doesn't seem possible, right? There's how many thousands of software companies, and we primarily work with larger companies that are kind of public scale and above. And you'd sort of expect, and there are patterns, right? Everyone's got a pipeline problem, this and that. But the places that these problems really show up are extremely varied. And early on in the early days of the company, we were mostly talking about pipeline generation, because everyone's got a pipeline generation problem, right? No one says, "Hey, I've got enough pipeline." It's just, it doesn't matter how much you have, you're going to want more. And so we get into these conversations and really start, through many, many conversations, start to peel back, once you've earned the trust of these organizations, to say, how does this actually show up? And we would get people who would kind of mid-meeting just stop, hey, look, it's a pipeline problem, but there's actually a deeper problem than a pipeline problem, which is we get to the end of our sales cycle and we're talking about the fifth most important problem at the company, with a person that doesn't have enough power to get things done, and our deals are slipping and they're smaller. And our actual problem is stage 1 to stage 3 or stage 4 velocity, or stage 3 to 4 conversion. And so they would have these burning problems, which for them had all these downstream effects of sales productivity and CFO sales productivity issues that were showing up in their financial filings around cost of sales being too high. And if you want to go with a message to an executive team at a company like that, going through and saying, hey, you have a pipeline problem, we can solve your pipeline problem, or hey, Wall Street's beating the crap out of you because your cost of sales is too high, do you have an answer for that? That gets the CFO's attention. That's the person that's going to sign, the check for the platform. And so there's very different ways to kind of uncover this pain. But if you don't come with a really well-developed perspective that you're going to refine throughout that sales cycle, that's extremely tailored to exactly what they care about, you're never going to even get close to the room that conversation happens.
Yeah.
And when you start to talk about, as Ed sort of alludes to, being and maybe sort of paraphrasing, is really being that advisor and that sort of Sherpa as you bring them from now into the future, is like, the important part's the future, right? The future is the opportunity, the future is the scary part. And it's sort of identifying for them, what does that future look like that they're trying to get to? establishing that you can help them get there. And then you get into the nitty-gritty tactical stuff around like, how does this actually show up in your numbers, and who are the people that need to have a seat at the table around solving this problem?
Yeah, I was at a dinner in Vegas, and I'm sitting next to, first time meeting the president of Schneider Electric North America. And I'm coached by my team, don't touch the third rail. I said, what's the third rail? They said, balance of trade. I said, all right, got it. So we're sitting down having dinner. They're showing us the menu. Across from me is the COO, and the CEO is next to me and the president. And I said, I'm looking at the menu. I said, oh my gosh, there's something missing on this menu. And he goes, what? I go, the elephant. He goes, what? I said, we're missing the elephant on this menu. I said, I'm going to call it out right now. Let's talk about balance of trade. Let's put the elephant on the table. And he looked at me like, whoa, I was told not to. I said, I know. So let's break that. Let's put it on the table right now. Let's figure this out, right? And it's kind of funny when a selling organization, BDR, ISR, account exec, et cetera, marketing, they're the six blind men touching an elephant, a client, for the first time. I think the client is this. I think the client is that. I think, how do you get a better perspective? Right. And I think this is what the biggest challenge is. What platform, what perspectives can I gain from a single platform that can give every one of my seller touching points the same point of view? Right. And I think this is what is always missing, because it's like a 440 relay, right? There's a certain section in the race where they're allowed to pass a baton. Sometimes the baton is not passed fast enough, or it's dropped. And this is what happens in selling, let's say, selling chains, for lack of a better word, right? The BDR misses it, the ISR misses it, and the account exec, and they all have different points of view. Having a platform like what I've used with Poggio gave me a single point of view on the elephant. And every one of my players now had a perspective from their, let's say, angle of approach or attack or responsibility to complement that and to move it and to be consistent with the client. Clients hate it when six people show up and they say, I'm MBG, I'm ISG, I'm SSG. I end up by saying, I am OMG. Oh my God. Let's figure this out.
I'm sort of wondering what our audience is thinking so far. How are we doing? Give us some feedback, and maybe there's one or two questions you'd like to have answered.
I'll go ahead and a couple different times I would have spoken up, but I came in a little bit late, so I missed a little bit of the beginning. But Gerhard, thank you as always. Always learn something from all of your different things you bring out and different people you bring in. And AI can't keep up. So anytime I can speak to like-minded people, share our experiences, always extremely valuable. And what I was came to mind, I raised my hand the first time with like Ed, when he's talking, he's just got so much experience and knowledge, and he's genuine, right? In my selling, you just got to be genuine today. And what comes to mind is there's a stat from Gartner. I think it's only 5% of time given to sales executives in a competitive buying process, which now more than ever, with all the AI marketing, the bad marketing, sales, generic stuff, I think it's such a great opportunity. And you think about, I've got 5% of the time with a buying committee. So back to Ed's point, you got to research a heck out of this. You might even have some of your experts lined up, the tech person with the other one, so that if there are 6 people coming, if it's justified, right, then you make sure everybody's aligned or they've done their respective homework. Matter of fact, in that meeting, there's an agenda, there's roles. It's kind of like the Miller-Hyman blue sheet. Who's positive, who's negative. So you really can make the best of that and have a good discussion. But I go back to the like, kind, and trust. And when you have a smart guy like Ed or Gerhard just listening, you might go in a couple of key questions that a CFO might be dealing with in your industry or something. But when you ask some good questions and it's a good experience, it's smart, it helps them. And they're typically never on the same page. They've all done their own research as buyers, right? But if you can help them have a good experience, take another couple steps forward, you're in the front of that pack of people who's involved in that because you've made a difference in a very short time. And so that's been my experience on the enterprise side. I do a lot more mid-sized small business. But back to the part about Matt said, becoming a trusted advisor. Back to the whole idea, there's just so much lack of trust today. And You know what? I think Matt also said something about like there was once a fear of a FOMO, fear of messing up, to now fear of messing up,
Yeah,
right? Fear of missing out to fear of messing up. That's it.
right.
And so I think a lot of this no decision is because people are like, we're okay for now, but if we screw up, I'll get fired. So that's
Yeah,
a lot of what I'm seeing and dealing with. But I go back to the whole premise of this AI component and trying to keep up. I think there's so much coming at everybody, especially the buyers. They're like, they need the expertise, but they need you to really narrow in on what's appropriate for them to help navigate through their buying process. Bring to bear as a trust
yeah,
advisor, here's the AI that might
yeah,
make sense for you, but again, stand out from the noise if you can help them. But the other point you mentioned, I think, Matt, too, is that if you can't help them, disqualify it. Matter of fact,
yeah,
I've won business before, like, listen, that's not my expertise. All of a sudden, some real trust. Here's somebody else, send them to Gerhard or somebody else. I get calls back 6 months down the road because I've somehow earned trust by being a very
yeah.
honest salesperson. And it hasn't been a good experience for them. So sorry, that's
Yeah,
my
so
dump. I just want to kind of
yeah,
add a few things that went back to different what people had said.
yeah, I love it, Mike. It's interesting. I always start AI by saying, I'm going to share with you some F-bombs around AI, right? It's fear of missing out,
Yeah.
fear of being obsolete, and fatigue. I am sick and tired of hearing about AI, right? And people are like, whoa, I said, AI sucks. It sucks power, water, and cooling like you would not believe. And people like, oh yeah, oh my God, thank you. Then I said, then it sucks time, money, and resources you wish you had. At the end of the day, AI is only a technology, but it provides choice. Choice like red pill, blue pill with Morpheus and Neo in the Matrix, right? Choice like the 5-year mission of the Starship Enterprise. Which algorithm do you want? Spock or Kirk? Who wrote those algorithms? What are the outcomes? When Clemenza left his house in New Jersey to do his task, his wife yelled out, not too many people remember this. His wife yelled out, don't forget the cannoli. Yeah, he goes, yeah, 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 like we all do, right? Gets in the car, finishes his task in New Jersey in the famous ad lib line, leave the gun, take the cannoli. I asked the client because he made a decision, happy wife, happy life. Clients, what is your cannoli? What are you trying to solve? Who are you trying to make happy? AI, we got that covered. Don't worry about that.
Hmm.
Find the cannoli. So I had people sending me cannolis.
That's awesome.
So you strip out the complexity,
Yeah.
right? Because they're confused. Because we've given them, they have so much content. There's very little context,
Yeah. The other
right?
thing I've seen though, Ed, is that a lot of them, even though they're afraid of AI, it's coming every which angle, they're like, but I know it's going so fast. Either I get on this train, however I get on it, or else I've got some real problems.
So I used to be a brakeman switchman for Southern Pacific, right? So I used to catch trains. And some engineers didn't like me, so that train was going faster than I could actually. So there are all sorts of different ways. Sometimes I'm going to pass on this, right? You have to find your pace. You have to be safe. So when the engineer was going a little bit too fast, I just waved my lantern. I said, "Hell, you, screw you. I'm not." So not all trains are meant to be caught,
Yeah. Yep.
right? Again, metaphorical kind of scenarios, right? It's just calm people down, right? And then I said, calm down. It's okay. Right? One of the things I want to do is try to have more conversations with you about some of the goals and objectives you're really going to be measured on
Mhm.
to drive your team because you have a multi-generational workforce now. How are they using AI and why and how do we, make it smoother for them? Because when they're better at human augmented AI, versus automated AI, that's when you differentiate yourself with your clients. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. Right. And he goes, huh. I said, it's not about automation, it's about augmentation. So how do we augment? And who do we augment? And why? So let's get on a whiteboard. Let's just draw this sucker out. Right. And I get on a whiteboard usually, and I always draw 2 or 3 things wrong intentionally. And the guy goes, that's not how we do it here. I said, oh, really? Here's the marker. Show me. How do you do it here? And by the time we finish, his DNA is on the board. And I won't distribute it, but can I take a picture of this? I really like what you shared with me today, especially this area. Why is this area so big when you write this? There's a reason why you made it big. And he goes, oh, that's my biggest problem. I said, got it. Got it. How do we help you solve that? Right? And all of a sudden, it wasn't part of the conversation. It actually magically appeared on a whiteboard.
It's an important, really important point as we sort of bringing this back to points of view. Is the point of view doesn't have to be perfect.
Right.
It probably just definitionally will not be perfect.
Right.
Because there is, AI is really good at, I think, Mike, you mentioned something, or Ed, about context. AI is actually, when created and set up properly, amazing at creating context from raw data. It's sort of AI really, if you sort of harness the power, are essentially context machines. And I think you can bring a lot of clarity to data to kind of build this point of view to present to someone. But what you're really trying to do with the point of view is invite them to correct your point of view, or disagree with your point of view, or add to it. And a lot of the time the sort of experience is, and none of these is any better or worse than the other, but sometimes, look, hey, like, you almost got it right, but actually the thing that we really worry about is this other thing, and that may not appear anywhere outside of internal conversations that their C-suite is having, because they have a really particular way that they think about this problem. There was an anecdote, Ed, that you had shared, I think, in a conversation before, where you kind of called out a project by name. That's one thing that always gets people. If you're like, you've got AI projects, and then you've got project whatever. And if you can talk about project whatever, you're like 3 steps forward. But when you figure out project whatever, whether you read about that from a publicly available source, or whether you bring that publicly available source to someone mid-level and they kind of clarify it for you, I can almost guarantee that when you talk to the C-suite about project whatever, it's going to be a really different conversation than the mid-level person. If you look at any organization out there right now, whether it's, everyone's trying to sell AI, whether it's ServiceNow or Salesforce or Google or Microsoft, or, everybody, Lenovo, everybody's got the thing that they want to talk about with AI. If you go and you talk to that line of business salesperson about, why are we selling AI? What's the vision? Versus you go talk to the chief strategy officer or the CEO or the CPO, like, you're going to have a very different conversation. And this is no fault of the junior person. It's just, that's not in their job title, right? And so I think it's one of these things where it's really about building that point of view, refining that point of view to earn the right to go talk to the people that can develop it for you or correct it. And what I think you'll often find, as Ed's story illustrates, I think, really well, is when you really get into those good conversations and earn trust, people will share shockingly large amounts of information about their company, like you wouldn't believe. And I think everyone's probably had that experience of you kind of try to go through the front door and it's just, hey, we don't need that. Or you get a couple levels deep and you're kind of like, I cannot believe you just told me that. I mean, I'll tell you, I have some of these conversations with CROs of very large public global companies, and they kind of share things around their views on the future of their workforce as it relates to people versus agents, and they are incredibly candid about the degree to which they want to sort of agentify their workforce, and those are not discussions that you're going to have in a group setting with 10 different people in the organization.
That's right.
And I think we talked a little bit earlier, I forget who had brought it up, but just a little bit about when you kind of get into these conversations about technical this, technical that, you kind of go down the rabbit hole. When you really start to get to these exact conversations, they're very different than I think, Ed, to use your word, the sort of third rail. There's definitely a third rail within these organizations, especially in group settings, around sort of candid discussions around people versus AI in the future, and sort of the percentage of the two. But you get into those one-to-one conversations for the people that are charting the strategy, and if you've got a solution that can help them get to where they're going, they are shockingly candid in a lot of cases, and that's really what a point of view is about. It's just earning a right to have that conversation. And
it's funny because I rarely talk about the solutions I have. I get them to the point they're like, your company does that, doesn't it? I say, yes, it does. Well, But you didn't talk about it. I said, well, I didn't feel it was the right time. But now that you brought it up, I think the timing's right. And so it's kind of interesting. You lead them to that conclusion, for lack of a better word. And all of a sudden they're like, now you have permission. They opted in, right? A lot of times we go hard charging, snap, and they opt out like 2 heartbeats, right? And so how do we get them? And one guy goes, well, Ed, you didn't have a lot of answers. I said, I rarely do. I have more questions because I don't understand enough yet. And I said, so that's why you're here I'm asking a lot of these questions because I'm trying to fill out this mosaic here. I said, in DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Planning Agency, there is a doctrine. It's called the Mosaic Warfare Doctrine. I said, let me explain that to you. And I walked him through it. He goes, oh my God, that's what we need to look at. I said, I'd like to take a look at it. Here are 3 things I want you to, to kind of peel back and map your company into the mosaic. And I think you'll see something very, very similar. So what I do is I share little nuggets of videos, white papers, and I always send a gift in the meeting, right? Bring a gift, blink first, give up something of value. One of the things I always leave with clients is to watch this one YouTube video. If you type in Jacob Collier National Orchestra, you'll find a 18-minute video that is so amazing where a client goes, oh my God, I'm that conductor. I said, yes, you are. How do you put them in a metaphorical kind of situation where they start to see themselves, where they start to see the power of creativity, ideation, all these things? Because at the end of the day, we're here to solve problems. I get that. But if we can't make them and give them something fun to kind of, I don't know, experience. So again, every meeting I have, I always bring a gift, right? Blink first, give up something. Clients don't expect it. And I met one of my competitors. He goes, why are we having this meeting? I said, I call it an FOF meeting. He goes, what's that? I said, in the military, they have signals in helicopters and jets and things and boats and ships and so on. It's called friend or foe. I said, I need to know if I see you on the silhouette on the horizon, whether I go to guns or not. He goes, son of a bitch. He goes, is this how you think? I said, day in, day out, buddy. So how do we help our clients map out their silhouettes? How do we help them understand their mission, right? How do we help them understand the teams that they have to lead? How do we help them prepare their teams as they go from one generation to the other? As their customers go from one generation to the other? What are their mindsets like? What's your value proposition? How does that remain consistent and universal? And I think those are the kinds of things when customers see how you help them rethink some of their approaches, you're in that room. You will be invited into those shift left conversations where you're not answering an RFP. I had a chief revenue officer call me. He goes, Ed, I don't want anybody else. I want you in that room. I said, all right, let's go. That's when you earned it. And I think sellers need to look at how to prepare for that close-up, right? That means you got to study like hell. You got to work like hell. I had one seller go, Ed, I don't have enough time. I said, make time. I said, this is a career. This is a kind of a mindset. You really got to think that. When I was doing sales training at Unisys, I asked the room, what's your favorite question to ask? All hands went up, right? They're all sellers. And I asked the guy in the back, I said, what's your favorite question? He goes, I ask him, what keeps him up at night? Everybody claps their hand and says, it's like Family Feud, right? It's just hilarious. And I'm going like, all right, let's say I'm the person you just said that to. Here's my answer. People like you keep me up at night. The fact that you asked that question tells me you had no research on me whatsoever. And the fact that you didn't do research on me it basically says you didn't spend any time, which means you have no respect for my time. Meeting's over. You're out. He goes, what? I said, you're out. He goes, I said, everyone in this room, do the work, right? It's a Bill Belichick thing, right? So all of these things are really important. Sellers is a whole new world. Customers know more than you can imagine, and they're already locked in 70 to 75% in their decision journey. How do you change that vector? How do you help them veer towards you, right? Selling is a whole different thing now. And platforms like what I found with Matt and Poggio, man alive, I got the map. Now I have to figure out how to get that gold idol out of the cave with Indiana Jones.
Well, I want to reflect on what you just said. What goes to my mind is that what we have really talked about over the last hour is the elements of conversation mastery.
Mhm.
And I think that the point of view is just one element. I think that we need to think about what is the purpose of a good conversation with a customer. It is to co-create and help buyers make more informed decisions.
Mhm.
And that begins with assessing the buyer's perspective. And we need to help them, as you said, Ed, earlier, understand the real challenges and help them rethink their approach in a way that makes them feel included in the conversation, where there's no divide between buyer and seller. And that builds that trust and rapport that you need to talk about the difficult things, like the pain points, and then offer them more nuanced, personalized, individualized point of view and show how you create value so you can arrive at that decision where buyers will thank you for helping them win.
Yeah, I always share the paradigm shift, right? It's a very fancy word. Consultants love the hell out of them. And so when I said, let me show you my paradigms, I just pulled out two dimes, two coins. Coin one, flip the coin. You want to save or you want to make money? Choose, flip the coin. Coin two, you want to address a pain or you want to address a gain? Flip the coin. What's your paradigms? How are you making decisions today? And why are you making decisions in that manner? Right. And it's kind of a fascinating discussion to have with them when I try to simplify it, right? When I have discussions around a very fancy multisyllabic word transformation, right? Consultants love the hell out of it. It's like Y2K on steroids. And I said, let's just use four-letter words on transformation. And what I do is I use Scrabble tiles and I spell out the word transformation. Then I connect four-letter words, the game of Scrabble. What's the cost? What's the time? What's the plan? What's the risk? What's the goal? What's the path? What's the data? All of these things are four-letter words. As a matter of fact, those same four-letter words on transformation pertain to whether it's self-transformation, team transformation, or company transformation. When you simplify these things and you get people to like lean back and say, oh my God, never thought of that. I said, our job is to provoke. I am the poker of bears and the kicker of hornets' nests, right? My job, when I asked this one CEO, he went public. I called him, congratulate him. I said, I love your today business. He goes, excuse me, Ed? I just went, yeah, I get it. That's your today business. What's your tomorrow business? How are you rethinking about the business beyond what you have today? Here is how we start thinking and helping clients rethink their now, new, and next, because that is the game. You're playing Go now. This is not checkers. This is not even 3D chess. This is Go, highly infinite. So are you playing an infinite game or are you playing a finite game? Per Simon Sinek. All of these things are really critical. I want to kind of remap how you're looking at things and rethink them so that we can build new models that are agile, that are flexible. Because in every ring of now, new, next, inside each of those rings is if, then, else. Our job is to help you think through that.
Wow.
That's what a great seller does, right?
Right, absolutely. I think you nailed it. You framed the challenges that salespeople are facing in a very practical way. I want to give our audience a chance to ask a few more questions, and then we are going to wrap it up.
Chris or Luca, you have you know, it doesn't even have to be a question. It could be a comment.
Yeah,
Hugo.
and I was
maybe.
curious. All right, go ahead, Luca.
No, Chris,
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
No
You go
problem.
ahead. Go ahead.
No problem, because I know I have to leave because it's 8 p.m. here. I have to cook in something, but it's very interesting, and Ed is a storyteller. Very interesting point. But to me, only one thing, because I'm interested how salespeople use artificial intelligence. Very interesting. And I deliver a lot of workshops with them. And I see that they use artificial intelligence to prepare better meetings with people and to be more prepared on that, and so on. It's very important. But they don't use artificial intelligence to have a new perspective on the opportunities.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, because you can use artificial intelligence as a mate, not as a something that give you information or elaborate information, but someone that give you a new perspective on your opportunity, or on the customer, and so on. And it's not a use that very diffuse in salespeople. It's more to make things better.
Yeah.
To have more information, to elaborate a lot of information, but not to elaborate a new perspective.
Yeah, I used ChatGPT once when it first came out 2.5 years ago, and I asked the question, give me a business model. Can you give me a business model combining cybersecurity and mRNA? And it came back with 10 recommendations. I threw out 7 because they were absolutely stupid, but the 3 I thought were really interesting. So I think, you know, using AI to kind of generate cross innovation, cross concepts. Because if you ask it a particular concept, it'll kind of narrow you down. What I try to do is mix and match, because I don't believe in physics or the laws of physics or gravity. I kind of let loose and I say, if we can combine disparate ideas, innovation, business models, approaches, what would that new model look like and why? What are the new skills are needed to do that? And how do I challenge my customer to rethink their next business overall, right? And so I try to use a cross innovation sort of approach when I use AI, as opposed to narrowing it down, because it's kind of systematic to that. And I expect somewhat of a similar outcome or result. But when I cross innovate, it gets really confused, but it gets somewhat creative, and I think that's the fun part. But I agree.
Yeah.
You know, how do we get people to leverage AI to be more creative as opposed to more prescriptive?
Yeah, I think there's a sort of embedded human dependency there as well, which is, I think people are a lot more comfortable with incrementalism rather than exponential. And when you sort of think about the sort of, you know, incremental, like, okay, I'm more prepared. I wrote this email, I did this, I did that, versus, you know, I sort of rethought the way that I wanted to position everything that we do for a customer, and hopefully challenge their worldview, right? Like, challenging someone's worldview is definitely not incremental. It's sort of an exponential opportunity, but people are just people don't deal well with exponentials. It's just sort of the way it works. And so I think some of that, and to kind of bring it maybe a little bit back to sort of brass tacks, is one of the things that we do actually talk a lot about with our customers is there's a lot of reliance on sales management to still enforce the discipline of the methodology. And usually the methodology is about reframing someone's um you know, sort of position on a problem, or identifying and reframing. And, you know, all the AI in the world isn't gonna change a customer's mind about that stuff. It's how you apply it. And, I think for us, it's sort of how do we give you the ingredients to go have those conversations as a seller? And it's up to the sales managers to kind of do that coaching to make sure they're having those right conversations, because it's not, back to the opening of this whole conversation. It's not a genie in a lamp that you just, you rub the lamp and it's like, here's what you should do with that customer necessarily. There's still judgment related. And I think, for us, when we're working with our customers, it's really around how do you almost, and this is a little counterintuitive, but almost set those guardrails for having those good conversations to say, here's this picture of the customer that you should go interrogate the customer with. I use interrogate loosely there, right? Is you use this to frame your conversation, and at least give the seller the bullet points to go and really have that in-depth conversation. They still have to have the conversation, but if they go into the conversation without any of that prior intelligence about what's going on, you don't have a shot in the dark of hitting on a real pain point. And so, I think it's one of the kind of interesting things about AI is by nature, it's very unstructured. So it makes it different than existing technologies. It's non-deterministic, it's unstructured. And a lot of the sort of utility of it comes from creating some structure and some guardrails around those outputs. And what are the formats you need it to be? What are the inputs? What is the context that you need to feed it around? Like in Ed's example, you go to ChatGPT and you ask, hey, build me a business plan. It doesn't know if you're a salesperson selling an enterprise product at Lenovo or a school teacher trying to get their, sixth graders to come up with business plans for the talent show, I don't whatever, and so I think there's a lot of context that you can add there. And ultimately for us, it's how do you sort of raise the outcomes across the board for everyone that's touching an account? And AI is phenomenally good at that. But in most areas, we are very, very far away from a place where it's just a magic button that delivers the answer. I do think there's some places that we can get a lot closer to that in the future, but I don't think it's a necessary precondition to drive immense amounts of value today.
So the way I see your platform, Matt, I look at it as if I were a chef trained under the cordon bleu, right? And there's a chef methodology, mise en place.
Yeah.
Right? Everything in its place. Before I even had that conversation or build a recipe, all the ingredients, knowledge, insights are all in place. Now I begin the process of delivering the meal or the deliverable, right? So to me, Poggio is almost mise en place. Chris, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
Actually, that was going to be my question as someone who's been using Poggio. Like, what would be your analogy, right, or metaphor for Poggio? And I think you just answered it with your chef analogy. So thank you.
It is one of the hardest things to do is to find relevant and even non-contextual insights and perspectives of their direction, their strategy, their initiatives, their players, non-players. Where do they sit? That's mise en place.
Yeah.
Right. Now that I have mise en place, guess what? I can cook.
The thing that I think is very interesting from our point of view is you talk to every organization, they've got a different version of that framework because they're all selling different solutions. There's different conversations that they want to get into. And so that's part of how we sort of think about the world is that there's a sort of configuration of that framework that needs to happen that you can sort of embed into Poggio so that, like I was saying before, if you're a Salesforce seller versus a ServiceNow seller, you're going to be talking about similar things, but you're going to be approaching those conversations differently. Yeah. And so there's a different set of ingredients and a different set of talk tracks and an order that you're going to put these pieces together. And that's going to be an evolving thing, that's not static. It's a fast moving world. And for us, it's the sort of thing that we like to help folks scale that across an organization from BDR to AE to account manager to ABM and make sure that all those ingredients are in the right place for the different, to continue the metaphor, all the different chefs in the kitchen are cooking the same recipe.
Yeah.
How can people get in touch with you, Matt?
So I'm easy. I'm Matt at poggiolabs.com. So you can drop me a note there. If you go to our website, there's also a trial forum that you can sign up there. And if you do go that direction, just mention this masterclass as the lead source so we know where it came from. Looking forward to chatting with folks. It's been a lot of fun.
So Ed, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
how do we get the genie back into the bottle?
You know, I don't think you can. So the thing is, you know, how do we manage that genie, right? And where do we direct that genie? And then it's kind of a fascinating time. And sellers have never had more opportunities and more power, no pun intended, selling power, right, than today, because the times have changed, and so should selling, right? And I think these are the kinds of conversations people need to realize, sellers need to embrace, because it's a whole different world now. It's a whole different game. And the thing is, how do you stand up and stand out? And I think that's the real challenge, and more so, Gerhard, the opportunity.
Well, I want to thank you, Ed and Matt and Greg, and everybody that participated, and the people behind the scenes. That was a amazing conversation. I will create a summary, and then we will send it to everybody. And I hope that we will continue the conversation offline very soon, because there's so much to be learned from Ed and so much to be gained from Poggio.
Yep, absolutely. Gerhard, thanks for the opportunity. Matt, great to work with you on this. Chris, really appreciate your attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Ed. Thanks, Gerhard.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.